Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everag's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back with quite a big update this week. Got some trades, some market background in the lead up to a very positive GDT event and, of course, Chat of the Week.
Let's bat through it.
Yeah, first off, we've got European trade or EU trade, and it was a fairly weak result overall, 13% down in milk solids equivalent, Steve, down 5% in the second quarter and 3.6% down in the first half of 2024. So fats 15% weaker in June and 6% down in the first half of 2024. And I guess you would have to say that's reflecting low supplies and high prices. So European exports aren't all that competitive right now. And limited supplies are also limiting the skim milk powder trade. So interesting there, Steve. Some fairly weak results in terms of EU exports, but to be expected, really.
Yeah. When we move to China's imports, which show the effects of this weaker internal demand and the rundown, in particular, of powder stocks. The trade overall 13% down in MSC terms in July. We haven't seen much change in that stat over the year. It's quite even, but what we are seeing is quite a change in the mix. This time, fats dipped. In terms of change, that's nearly a 20% dip in the month, changing around from. We've seen positive growth in the last half year. And skim milk powder trade's been falling pretty sharply as well. And when we look at the monthly numbers for fats, while that short-term trade has dipped, that's a year-on-year percentage, which is not really indicative because butterfat trade, butter in particular, has been elevated for a while. So there is demand coming through there, and you can see that's more consistent on a month-to-month basis. But also comfortable it seems, in a band of about $6,500 a tonne in terms of landed price being imports. We've seen that pick up lately, whether that changes things or not, but we can see going back a bit. It's more price sensitive maybe when it gets higher, but let's see how that pans out. And then when you look at skim milk powder, same sort of analysis. That slide is very apparent here. But are we turning the corner? We have seen months where we have picked up the single month trade, but whether we're going to see that or not is one to watch.
Yeah, and this is some New Zealand trade data. The full trade data is out a little later today, but just a little sneaky peek, Steve, here. Seeing New Zealand whole milk powder exports just to China and Hong Kong are down. Overall, whole milk powder trade was up a little, 0.4% up year on year, but to China, that trade was down 28%. So a whole lot of trade going into other regions like Middle East and North Africa and Southeast Asia to make up for some of that shortfall, Steve.
Yeah, so the full analysis next week, which will give us something to stuff into next week's video.
Yes.
So some background in terms of market movements. Just picked out a few here. Skim milk powder creeping higher. The GDT result will probably give this a bit of faith in Europe. The supply side certainly helping here with expectations that we're going to see limited availability.
Yeah, and then in terms of butter, I mean, we just keep seeing these prices and these futures pushing into new heights, Steve. No real change in the settings, but some people are sort of back from holidays and the full realisation that there's not a lot of product around perhaps, and some positions need to be covered. But short-term trades are happening in that range of 7,400 to 7,500 euros a tonne. So, but really a hot market there right now, Steve.
And into the US, where cheese is the one that's really moving, and production headwinds for both milk, less of a concern, but cheese manufacturing seems to be the short-term concern, pushing even above European benchmarks there for cheese. So milk supply challenges are going to get easier. Weather is much cooler in the upper Midwest and central regions, so that would start to provide a bit more faith that milk production will rebound with pretty good margins in coming months. So a strong GDT result, Joe.
Yeah, the overall price index was up 5.5%, and that, Steve, is the best lift since March 2021, quite some time ago. And it's the best whole milk powder gain since that period as well. So we've seen the first rise rise in skim milk powder in 4 events. So again, a little bit more upside there. And it seems we've lost some of that urgency in the short term for fat positions being covered. But cheddar has completely missed the boat, and I guess it's not a big platform for cheddar, but not as strong as the sort of background market activity that we're seeing in the EU and the US.
So in demand for whole milk was probably the standout. And that's, I think in that respect, we'll talk about that a bit more. But that's coming from China and the Middle East. Butter very strong as well, which is pretty encouraging, really, where the prices are at.
And in terms of these spot price comparisons, the EU quotes just stand out there, Steve, in terms of butter. Oceania, New Zealand, still a very cheap source, even at these prices for fat. Whole milk powder, well behind the EU quotes again. EU just not competitive on whole milk powder at the moment and just making to order, no doubt. And a bit more aligned in skim milk powder and cheddar for what it's worth. So interesting.
So in the results, this one will be particularly pleasing for New Zealand producers. The strong lift in whole milk powder across the board. We've still got that downward sloping curve, which is a feature, with more milk coming later, or more product available later. But the spot value, this is the strong support given the spot value from this event, up above $9 to $9.40 per kilo milk solids by our working. So they were pretty happy over the ditch.
Yes, much healthier milk value.
When we look at skim milk powder, this curve's tidied up quite a bit. A good J curve there. Last event has flattened out somewhat, but pretty healthy gains, even though we're still well below the competitors. Jo, how did we compare against the Europeans?
Yeah, look, still a small EU premium for skim milk powder that we can see there, although it has come back a bit with this latest GDT event. And in terms of skim milk powder, that's the comparison. GDT well below those other futures benchmarks there. So interesting that it's still pretty good buying on GDT in terms of skim milk powder.
I think the fat's quite interesting here, this event. So we talked about the fact that short-term clamour had worked its way out of the system. But AMF, which we've been watching in this comparison to the European butterfat market, this has lifted pretty strongly. The curve's almost flattened out with 7% gains in contracts 3 to 5, which is pretty healthy given where the price is. So world market's still coming from New Zealand butterfat. The European price is so high. And when you look at butter itself, this is the unsold at 25 kg product. We're well past those big falls in early contracts, and this curve's almost flat as well. Again, we saw strong gains out there in later contracts, averaging better than $200 a tonne, or around 3.5% for those. So that's pretty healthy.
Yeah. And again, I love this chart. That AMF discount is still holding. It's about where it was, over the last couple of weeks, with similar gains for both, but still pretty good buying for fat in terms of AMF. And this butter differential is not narrowing. So we've still got those sky-high European prices reflected in the EEX futures. And way down here, we've got the GDT event. Even though this was quite a positive event for butter, there's still a big margin there, Steve.
Okay. In terms of who bought what, China's this is probably the most significant development in terms of buying regions. Chinese whole milk powder purchases were well higher than last year. This has been the best August in 4 years. So that is, we are seeing signs that the market is turning, tightening. I'll still need more events to prove to myself that this has changed, but that is a good start. When we look at skim milk powder into Southeast Asia, that was a big lift last time. This time it couldn't be maintained, but we're still well above last year for several events.
Yeah, and in terms of back to whole milk powder, the Middle East did stay around and help firm up those whole milk powder prices, Steve. And again, this is the best event since February 2024, so pretty positive all around, really, in terms of pricing.
Okay, so bring us home with the chart of the week, Jo.
Chart of the week, Steve. And we're back in Europe for this week's chart of the week with European dairy product output and some interesting numbers here for June. Comes with a small lift in milk output that we'll look at in a minute, 1.5% overall, but with a little less fluid milk in the system for June at least. More manufacturing milk available than that. The monthly numbers look a little bit odd. Skim milk powder is the only product that's really increased there. Butters quite significantly down. Cream might be the explanation, but we're not really seeing that reflected in really strong cream demand, but also milk solids are a limitation on butter production. Skim milk powder is a bit of a jump there, but we don't really see how that lines up with perhaps the milk availability. And understandably, whole milk powder well down, European whole milk powder out of the money in the export area there. But when we look at milk production, Steve, milk solids are up 1.4%, milk up 0.9% for the month. So we expect this has sort of gone a little backwards since then in terms of the hot weather that we've seen in some of these key production regions. But just interesting to see how those numbers do or don't line up, Steve.
Yeah, it's the first month in a while we've seen solids better than milk. So, yeah, that is an interesting development, how long that stays above there. All right. Well, that's all from us. Thanks for watching. We'll be back again next week.